Hello, everybody. I'm David Canfield from Vanity Fair. Welcome to the official FYC event for Mary and George, the Stars Limited series. We have an all-star panel here. So allow me to introduce them, beginning with Julianne Moore, who plays Mary Villiers. Hi,
Hi.
Julie. Nicholas Galitzine, who plays George.
Hello.
Tony Curran, who plays King James.
Hi there.
Liza Marshall, our executive producer and showrunner.
Hello.
DC Moore, our executive producer and writer.
Hello, how you doing?
And Oliver Hermanis, our executive producer and director. Hi, Oliver.
Hello.
All right. So this is a period of history I feel like we don't see very much, and especially in this way. Liza, I actually wanted to start with you because I believe the origins of this project really are related to, I think, what a lot of the audience's experience was with this show, which is, wait, this is actual history? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I came across the story. Well, the fact that James's sexuality, really, that his court revolved around his love and lust for men, which is something that people, even in this country and the UK, really don't know much about. So then we found Benjamin Woolley's incredible non-fiction book, and then I gave it to Dave, and we really felt that there was a TV show there.
I'd only ever been told that I found out that James was gay in an interview for Cambridge that I failed really miserably. And exploded in my face. And I'd not really thought about it much after, because it's not something that's really talked about in our culture or history or anything else. It's sort of quiet, buried secret. And then reading the book that Liza sent me, it was just like, holy Then the story, that as a sort of precinct, if you will, was amazing. The idea of this court where they chuck forward hot young men to try and lure the king is amazing. And then you have Mary and George, who, every single thing I read about them made me go, these two are incredible as a mother and son. Unfortunately, we couldn't get any decent actors to play them, and so it didn't really work out. But that's a joke. It's a joke. Anyway, so then the third thing that really got me after those first two was I'm going to get kicked off this Zoom in a second.
We've got 30 minutes to go. So.
Yeah.
I'm just going to bury myself again and again. Anyway, and then the third thing was just he's genuinely not represented. Like, there's very few actors who've played James.
Right.
This time is, in Shakespeare in Love, when they want the famous monarch to turn up, it's Judi Dench playing Elizabeth, because she appeals to sort of an English sensibility. She won wars and she was a virgin. So as a woman, that puts her in a sort of ideal place to romanticize. Whereas James is anti-war, he slept with men, and he was Scottish. So the English don't want to think about him. So yeah, just everything of that reading the book. I love Liza as well. So the chance to start on this with her was just yes. Where do I sign?
Obviously, the direction and the performances come into this as well, but talk a little bit about how you thought about the tone, figured out the tone, especially in the early going of the series. It's very biting, it's very comic, and it's very surprising in that way because of the period, and we associate historical dramas, I think, with a kind of stiffness that this show very much does not have.
Yeah, my first emails literally my first email to Liza, I mentioned I, Claudius and Deadwood, which are both, if you sit down and watch these shows, they've got a wit about how they interpret the past and bring it and make it feel alive now. And so that always felt important to us. And then if you look at the actual time, James, in England, the country tends to reflect the monarch. So Victorian era, everyone was more sort of buttoned up and hypocritical. Under James, people were more allowed to sort of indulge their lascivious side. So there's a sort of Weimar Republic feel to this era, and it felt like we couldn't give justice to that era without being sort of rude, raucous, and all the other things. Isn't that right, Liza?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. There was tons of swearing. James swore all the time in his court. He wasn't a fan of swearing, but always swore. And he had a particular word for the women that went on hunts with him, which began with a C.
Which we don't.
It does rhyme with hunts, but you can't.
And it starts with a C.
That's why Julie. That's why Oliver cast me, because he's like, who can we get that swears a lot? Oh, get that fucker Tony Curran. So that's why I was cast. I think.
True. This is true.
Wasn't it? Is it true that blondes have more fun, Nick? Tell me.
Yeah, it's true. I've been a proper slag this week. It's been lots of fun.
You look lovely.
Thanks, Tony boy. You're not quite as ginger as you usually are you?
I've gone brunette. I mean, only Julianne has stayed the proper
Julie's
red.
flying the ginger flag.
I'm
What
the
is
only one who stayed the same. You guys have all
Big old
transformed.
change. Big old change.
Mutated.
I love the
Anyone who
actors
sees
immediately
the
start
show,
talking about
this
their hair.
How very appropriate.
Yeah.
Julie, I know you've done plenty of period work before, but it is a very different kind of tone. So how did you find your way into it? What felt fresh about it to you, especially a character like this?
Well, I think so. I mean, honestly, it really leapt off the page when I first read it. I mean, she's an incredible. I mean, what Dave wrote is so it's so indelible, so kind of alive and so irreverent. And there was something about her that, she's voracious in terms of her energy for life. And that was evident like on the page. And then when I spoke to Oliver and Liza, they were like, this is what we want. We want it to come alive. We want it to feel modern. We want it to feel sexual and like something that unlike most historical dramas that we see, I think. So I was very intrigued by it, and having never, I mean, I hadn't done accent work in a really long time too. And so it's incredibly exciting for me to be challenged by something like this. I mean, I was actually terrified, honestly, to come and do like an historical drama in England as an American, as the only American, was truly terrifying. But I was thrilled by the opportunity, really.
I would imagine that being as mean as you get to be in this, I don't know if it made it easier, but maybe a little bit more fun.
Well, she's not, I never thought of her. Well, actually, no, she can be really truly.
She can be a little withering.
She can be really, really mean. She's someone who doesn't feel like she has a lot of time, and feels pretty desperate. And so I think that she's not at her best all the time, because she is so she is so stressed, I think, by her situation. But I was intrigued by the fact that this was someone who felt like she didn't have opportunity, and where was she going to get it? How was she going to keep her family alive? How was she going to get ahead? And she sees opportunities, I think, through the men that she can be in relationship with, and through her male children. And here she had this wonderful male child who she saw as almost a proxy for herself, who could maybe achieve everything that she couldn't. And so she sort of, pushes him forward. And it was unusual and funny. Like, so once again, the tone, actually, there was something wonderful about the language that Dave created, where it was a slightly elevated tone. So it's not that we were leaning into what was a comic, but it's slightly removed. So there's sort of a style to it. And that was something that Oliver was interested in exploring as well. And you could see it in his composition, and in the way he cast it, in the production design, and in everything was sort of slightly elevated, but also really human. There was something sort of fleshy and available about these people too.
Absolutely. So, Nick, what is it like getting pushed forward in that way, as Julie puts it, by Julianne Moore?
It's fantastic. It's wonderful to be pushed in that way. I think, the thing that really attracted me, certainly, in reading the first 2 episodes, was that wonderful, sort of delicious relationship, really, between the two of them, and these sort of co-conspirators, and with these sort of Machiavellian spirits. And obviously, we meet George in a very fragile, very vulnerable capacity, but he's galvanized by his mother. And I think just being able to sort of play out that tremendous amount of growth from episodes 1 till 7 was such a wonderful challenge. And obviously acting with Tony as well, because there's so much tenderness in that relationship as well, a tenderness that maybe he doesn't always have in his relationship with his mother. So I feel like I got the opportunity to play someone who had a tremendous amount of multitudes in him, which I think is something that we always really look forward to as actors.
Was there an element of this character that informed the way you went into him, particularly at the beginning? We meet him as a kind of very impressionable, doesn't necessarily know the most, able to be molded by his mother. What was that sort of initial spark for you?
Yeah, I think he's just I thought it was really fascinating to play someone so deeply feeling, and I think against the sort of the throes of the difficulties of this sort of this period world that we find each other in. The notion of going off to France sort of being akin to going to the moon, and I think it was just really interesting playing someone that I think felt really human in that sense, because I think oftentimes when we watch period pieces, for some reason everyone feels very stoic, and that's not George at all. When we first meet him, and it was fun, especially in the first few episodes with Ollie, getting to kind of chart that like pre-France George, and then really be able to sort of inject him with this kind of charisma and arrogance, I suppose, that he kind of has when he comes back home, and which is obviously quickly dismantled as soon as he gets to court, and he has to sort of build it up again. But he never feels like he's on stable footing, with his mother in court, sort of in rivalry with Somerset, and it's just so fun having a sort of unpredictability, I guess, where George's fate really kind of seemed to change scene by scene, which I really loved.
Yeah, always unpredictable.
Yeah.
Tony, what about for you with King James? I mean, as Dave was saying, this is a character who looms very large historically, of course, but isn't as prominent, say, in past dramas as one would maybe think. And here we get a very particular version that you play.
Yeah, no, I always felt when I spoke to Oliver and about this role, he's got a great sensitivity about him. This man, he's a very emotional individual. He has his desires and so on, but a lot of those desires are sort of cemented in his sort of younger years. He has a relationship when he's a very young man with a gentleman called Lord Lennox. And as I've talked about before, he doesn't have a father. His father got assassinated, Mary Queen of Scots. His mother was killed as well. So, these sort of patriarchal, matriarchal figures in his life were absent. So I think when he comes across individuals that like Mary and George Villiers, who appear on the surface to be loyal, because I think in episode 4 he talks about the bird and loyalty, and how I think that's a big part of James's makeup, because he's got he's very paranoid, and witches and all these sort of individuals, who can be trusted. Everybody wants a piece of him. But when the Villiers come around, I think he obviously he's very attracted by George Villiers. He's a very handsome young man, but also about the sort of the loyalty that comes across with these two characters, that they seem to they do him a favour with regards to Robert Somerset and his rather sort of unfortunate end. But I think a lot of what I talked with Oliver and with our lovely I've forgotten his bloody name, or Benjamin, was about his sort of his fear of. He's nourished in fear. He was always sort of very sensitive man. So it was a very interesting journey in that sense, so I very much relished that. But as Julianne says as well, it was also very daunting playing some of these characters, but it was still a lot of fun though.
Oliver, I would say that the show is often at its most fun when we're seeing these three really just kind of navigating each other and relishing these sticky dynamics. Talk about working with the three of them, finding these points of tension and intimacy, how you experience that.
This was a very interesting experience for me, because it was the first time I had done television episodic work. It was a strange feeling of, felt like I was making a movie for a long time. And then all of a sudden, I had to move on to doing post, and the actors kept shooting, and that was very strange to let them go, to like have them suddenly be with other directors, and that was I wasn't used to. Like it's like a bit of a jealousy. Also, it's so weird to like not finish the narrative. And so I that was like an interesting sort of thing, but it was fun to sort of be there to kind of like do the sort of setup of these relationships, because I got to do the sort of like when the Villiers are pretty poor and they have nothing, and they've, Mary's really like at the beginning of her scheming and plotting and seeing the cracks in the door. I didn't get to do the fun kind of payoff stuff where George is a psychopath and James. So but it was definitely fun to set it all up and to be able to like build the world in that way. And yeah, I just learned a lot from doing that.
You got to plant the psychopath seeds at least. How did the tone initially come to you? I mean, that really is what strikes me so immediately about the show, as I mentioned earlier, and a large part of that is the direction. When I met Liza, I put together like a presentation of what I thought was a sort of attitude of the show, and that is a very helpful process because it sort of like defines it for myself. And I ended up actually using a lot of images, paintings from the period, which are just of animals tearing each other apart. I'd found a lot of them, and it was an interesting sort of concept of of this idea of it just being a dog-eat-dog world. And so that kind of became my sort of like punk approach to it. And the production designer Helen Scott and the costume designer Annie Simmons, they both have a very strong punk energy too, and so they loved that as well. And we just sort of ran with that, and it was a sort of constant reminder just to say that Mary's attitude to the world is why not? Like if not now, then when? And
Right.
so it was just that was kind of what I thought about as the show as well. It's just like just push forward, like never second guess yourself, just like take the gap.
Julie, you seem to be, arriving
I
at
was gonna say
that.
the why not have more everybody else does kind of idea. It's like the more Mary has, the more she wants. And I think this idea that there's one locus of power, that's the king, is the only person who's truly powerful, and anyone who wants any access to it has to be close to the king. So this whole story is this journey to getting to James and staying close to him and kind of knocking out everybody who's in your way. And it, like I said, it felt active and voracious and dangerous and also modern in the sense of like this unbridled sense of ambition.
A large part of the way this story develops is through the design and through that kind of proximity you're talking about. So, Liza, I'm curious in a macro sense what it was like putting this production together, which immediately has to, evoke the period, really get those details right, but also then tells a story through it. So what was it like finding these locations, working on these costumes, things like that?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge we faced, and something that we didn't realize until we started pre-production, was how there were no Jacobean costumes in any of the costume stores here or in Spain or in Italy. So Annie and her team of about 65 makers set up a whole atelier under our production office and made every single costume that you see on screen. So it's really an extraordinary feat. I mean, Julie alone, I think you had 60 dresses.
So many. It was always
Many
fitting.
different
Yeah.
dresses. It was completely incredible. And we just had this army of people making the costumes and people making crowns and leather work. And it was a really extraordinary achievement from an amazing group of craftspeople. And then obviously with the locations, we pretty much shot in real Tudor and Jacobean houses. So we built a couple of sets, but the majority of it is shot on location. And so that was all around London and up in Scotland. So it was very period accurate.
Wow.
Yeah.
For the actors, how did you find those costumes? They're pretty spectacular, and I would imagine they would help you get into character, just the fittings alone.
It was a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff underneath
You
there.
wear a lot in the show.
You have to wear stuff underneath your stuff to hold the stuff up. That's what was so funny. There's so much construction in the clothes just to create that shape. So you had on, you had like one pad and another skirt and another thing, layers and layers and layers of clothing. That being said, we were still cold. But no, it was beautiful. The work was extraordinary, really. I mean, it was so incredibly detailed, and so wonderfully constructed. And of course, the clothing tells a story in its own right, because you watch as these people become closer to power and become more successful. Everything is indicated in what they wear, in the colors and the fabrics and the size. You watch Mary Villiers' hair get bigger as she kind of gains more access to power. You literally watch them take up space, and all of that, all of those things are all of those signifiers of who they are in what they wear.
Tony and I was gonna say struggle with the heels. Probably me more than Tony, seeing as I broke my ankle on the job. There's sort of quite sort of period. I mean, they're really, it's quite a small heel by comparison to a lot of heels. But a
heel is a heel, man. Heels are hot.
A heel is a heel. That's what they say.
Yeah.
Nick, if you're not used to them, honey, they're a bitch. Let me tell you.
I think the real steal was that Julie never had to wear a heel.
I refused. I was like, you can't see my shoes. I'm not wearing the heels.
Well, that is possibly the greatest advice that award-winning actress Julianne Moore has ever given me, is that wear comfy shoes.
Yeah.
And so I will take that with me.
Julie, I was shooting the other day in this show. I had a real 4-week-old child in my hands.
Oh my goodness.
She was a she, but it was supposed to be a boy, and I was christening the baby, and you came to mind, and it was day 2 in this 18th century church, and I said, "Bring me the Uggs, bring me the Uggs." I said, "Where's the framing?" He said, "We're on a 50." I said, "Right,
bring me the Uggs." That's right.
So for the next 2 days, you've lost a few inches. I'm like, I don't care. I'm comfortable.
You feel comfortable. You feel stable. You don't break your ankle like poor Nick. Exactly.
Poor baby.
Much has been made of this show's approach to sexuality. So, Dave, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about what I find to be the fascinating balance in this show of not necessarily succumbing to obviously stuffy period understandings of sexuality, while also not injecting contemporary understandings of it, and just letting what seem to be the facts tell the story in some ways.
Yeah, we definitely didn't want to project back, because I really feel like the conception of sexuality then is so different, and we don't. The first thing that Liza said to me is the Victorians have sort of tricked us into thinking we're always buttoned up, and we just. There's a very deep historical book called by a guy called Thomas B. Young about the fact that at the time there wasn't huge uproar against James. There wasn't people in the streets sort of campaigning against him, and partly that might have been because of the power of a king, but it was also like there seemed to be, the Duke of Buckingham was called the Duke of Effingham. Like there was a sort of jokey, people seemed to be at home with it on some level. And then in the sex, I think I was aware of the limits of what you can show on screen. I did want the king, the first time you see him, to have an erect penis. But I did put within the margins, we don't need to see it. And we actually tried a prosthetic, but it didn't quite land, did it, Tony? It wasn't.
Well, I tried my best, I did.
It wasn't your fault. It was the angle. The angle was off.
That was your first day.
That was his first day.
That was your first day.
I had. And I'm standing there, and Julie looks at me, and she's like, "Hey, Tony." I'm like, "Hi, Julie. It's a little chilly in here." Anyway.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, okay, drop your linen and stop your grinning. Let's go. Let's go.
I did enjoy having to make the choice of which prosthetic to use, and then presenting it to you, Tony, and you were like, "Is that it?"
There you go. More than a handful's of waste, someone once said. There you go. Yes.
But in the script, what I was trying to do was, like, you don't know what's going to land on screen. So is the erect penis going to? I knew that people would be nervous about it, like Sky reading it in Stars. So I put like we will be aware it's there, we don't have to see it. Then we tried it. It didn't quite land. It makes this scene, it distracted you from the scene, let's put it that way. Because you're like, is that penis real? That would be the only thing you're thinking through the scene. And I think similarly with the sex scenes through the show, in the writing, I think I tried to give enough latitude that performers and Oliver and everyone involved could sort of, and there was a lot of back and forth in certain moments of like, is this the right way to do this? How do we balance this? And I do think we had an organic understanding between us of how to make things land. And then I think Oliver, the way he shot it is so brilliant. And there's a confidence to the looking at men's bodies that is I'm really proud of. Like, I think there's a shame of looking at men's bodies in a lot of period dramas, a lot of contemporary dramas, and that was the key thing to avoid, because I think it would be bringing a sort of the wrong lens onto the screen. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Oliver, can you talk about that a little bit? The frankness of these scenes, the hotness in many ways.
I mean, that was definitely. I mean, I remember when I read the first 3 episodes that I directed, and there was an orgy in all of them, I think. Episode 2 doesn't have one, but like episode 1, George has to walk through an orgy. In episode 3, there's this famous orgy. And I did go, how will we do that? Or how will I do that? Or how does one go about that? Because it's mechanical in some ways. I think it was also just very comical in the way of making the show, because we were in locations that wouldn't allow us to have any liquids in the building, because they're the National Trust places, and like, well, I've got to spray all these actors full of sweat. And so there was just something kind of like labor intensive in a way about it. But at the same time, I suppose conceptually and creatively, it was about being a story that was unafraid of its sexuality, and the characters are unafraid of sexuality, and the characters use sex as agency and power, and it's another tool that they just exploit to get ahead, because as Julie was saying, there's this single pyramid of power, which is the king, and if everyone knows that the king is very sexually charged and has a weak spot for beautiful men, then that's what everyone's going to just put in front of the king. And so there had to be something about the show and about the way that we represented sex that felt unapologetic, and I think it's interesting, because we are in an age right now where I think sex scenes are being interrogated for, like, should they be in films, should they be in television, and like, what do they tell the audience? But I do think that a sex scene always, to my mind, a sex scene is never really about the physical act. It's about what it represents, or what it's doing for the character, how it's pushing the narrative forward. So we had to interrogate a lot of these scenes in that way. But at the same time, I think that is just a big theme of the show, is the fact that the king likes to have sex with a lot of people at the same time, and that's what George has to do to get in there.
George, not Nick.
Not Nick. Well, Nick did. No, Nick. That's why it's blonde now.
Yes, got it. It all makes sense. For Nick and Tony, though, there's real affection that develops between these characters, and that is a lot in many ways through these scenes. So how did you find your way through them together?
Well, I mean, I think it was just, Tony and I think immediately felt a sort of connection and a chemistry with each other, and a kindred sort of ship. I think that made it really, really easy. But I think we both really loved our characters, and it's kind of sad. I feel we only get like a really sort of brief moment of marital bliss in the show, really kind of at the end of 4 in some ways. But, from all the evidence that we have, there was a genuine love and connection between these two people. And I think it was, against where sort of George goes with his appetites and how they kind of drive him, to become this very vile person. I mean, there was a real beauty and a tenderness within that relationship, and kind of and I'm sure Tony can sort of speak to this more, but James kind of felt like a role model to him in some ways, and he really was able to learn from him too. So it was very multifaceted, and I think Tony and I really enjoyed acting those out.
Yeah, no, I mean there was a sort of I guess there was a sort of father figure vibe, and certainly meeting Nick, it's not every time you get to work with an actor with such a sort of sensual in such a sensual way, but and the chemistry of us as people and as actors, thankfully, I don't know who cast this gig, but they did okay. So me and Nick seem to get on quite well, which when we stop having a wee joke and a bit of levity, we would, you know, get involved, as it were. But no, there was a great, you know, his letters, his correspondence with George and James, he calls him my dear sweet child and wife. I think there was a great tenderness there. Obviously, he was a very beautiful, handsome young man. And I'm sure George James thought he had a great personality as well. He was gifted, talented, and I think he genuinely fell in love with him. And there was a great tenderness. I think that's what makes our story, or elements of our story, with many characters so tragic that you know, these people do find each other, and then they're sort of taken away from each other. It's very similar with Sandy and Mary as well. There's a sort of confidant that Mary has with Sandy, and that's another, without giving away, you know, a very sort of tragic end. But everybody seems to be, you know, aspiring to something in the show, ambition or distraction or desire or love, or which I think Oliver created that world so beautifully in our first 3 episodes, that we were able to sort of, you know, carry on through with the other directors and sort of express our characters, you know.
To the point of the tragic end, I'd love to close with you, Julie, and ask a little bit about what you made of the direction of this show in the last act. We do lose some of that, you know, lighter tone that we had.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's really about the cost of seeking power, right? You know, it's like, what do you, when you are consumed by ambition or by greed, you know, where does it lead you? What human cost is there? It's to your relationships, obviously. Whenever you prioritize ambition over everything else, you know, it's destructive. And so what's interesting to me about Mary, like I said, when she sees George as her proxy, she sees the possibilities in him. I think she underestimates the cost and doesn't realize that she's seeing the same, what she sees in herself, that she recognizes in him, is going to be his undoing, you know. That he is someone who destroys himself in the process of this. And so I think you do feel that as you watch this show. And like I said, it's a message that's always worth hearing, no matter where we live, no matter what period we're in. It's like, seeking power and seeking financial gain above all else is destructive.
Well,
kind of a downer. Sorry, guys.
Listen, this is the show that gives you the
wildly
high highs,
entertaining.
The low lows.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Wildly
gives you high and everything in between. Well, Julianne Moore, Nick Galitzine, Tony Curran, DC Moore, Oliver Hermanus, Liza Marshall, thank you all so much, and thank you all for watching.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.